AI tools are getting better at reading resumes, at reading content, but I don't think any job seeker would say my resume is an accurate reflection of who I am and not just my ability to do the job, but my potential, right? It's just sort of this static page that is what it is. And the more you can, as a job seeker, validate, I actually have this experience. This is actually what I've gone through. These are the certifications I have. This is the license that I got, my work history. That validation, I think, will be critical in this next phase of AI for employers, because that's what they're going to be looking for. It's not just, did you write it down, but can you validate that information? And the sooner you can validate that up funnel, I think the easier it will be for job seekers to get through that hiring process, especially in this world of fraud, fraudulent applies that is sort of expanding across the board. It's easier than ever to just submit fake applies. So validating who you are as a job seeker will help you stand out.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hey everyone, it's Terry Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. Welcome to the HR Huddle. Before we dive in today, I've got some news. First, big thank you. Seriously, 3.5 years ago, this podcast started as a way to talk through the messiness of HR. And somehow you all showed up, you stuck with us, and you made it something pretty incredible. So thank you for listening, sharing, and yes, probably occasionally yelling at your speakers. Second, speaking of change, I'm excited to be passing the mic for HR We Have a Problem to somebody who knows this space inside and out. Cliff Stevenson. You know him as the co-host of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech and Director of Research here at Sapient, which means the show will continue to be insightful and with at least 30% more data and charts that you won't be able to see if you're just listening. You'll be in good hands. As for me, I'm not going far. I'm just making a pivot. My new podcast, The Pivot Effect, co-hosted with my partner Susan Richards, launches on April 23rd. We'll have the same curiosity, slightly different lens, which we're going to be focusing on you, so you don't want to miss it. So with that, I officially pass the torch for HR We Have a Problem to you, Cliff. No pressure. This audience is lovely, but it has high expectations. Break a leg.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host for today, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research at Sapient Insights Group. And if you're wondering, that's not Terry's voice. That's because Terry is still recovering from the 2026 Winter Olympics, where you probably remember seeing on TV winning the gold medal for the United States in frozen podcasting. So I'll be here this week for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. It is the show where we break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day and help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we'll talk about what you can do about them. And joining me today for that exact reason is Aly Baxter, Director of Prospects at Indeed. Hello and welcome, Aly. It's great to have you.
Hi, I'm super happy to be here, Cliff. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, I am very excited to have you today because of all of the topics we could be covering. Recruiting and talent acquisition is very near and dear to my heart. That is pretty much where I got started in HR, when I always joke and say when I had a real job, but when I worked in HR doing the actual recruiting and, paperwork and everything else that goes along with it, I worked for an RPO, for a recruiting process outsourcing company, basically doing recruiting for other companies. And being a small and growing business, we basically had to know how to do all of the different things, right? It's one thing, to be the HR person, but, I also needed to know how to do recruiting. Plus I was recruiting recruiters, which is the most stressful thing ever, right? Because you're like, they're looking at you, what's going on? And whenever I now, as an analyst, look through all of the cool stuff that's coming out in the talent acquisition space, I'm a little jealous that we didn't have those back in the day. Every time I see something, I was like, that would have made things so much easier. But, and I know we're going to end up talking about this, there are probably some things that also maybe not made it more difficult, but added some complications, right? They're cool, new, powerful tools, but, with great power comes great responsibility, that sort of thing. So I'm very excited to hear about what's been going on at Indeed. Probably, if I can't imagine anyone listening to this doesn't know who Indeed is, but maybe a little bit of background on you and Indeed and why we're going to be talking about recruiting today.
Yeah, awesome. Like Cliff mentioned, I'm Aly Baxter, and I have been in the product space for quite some time, specifically focused on helping businesses, whether that's been small businesses or enterprise corporations. And Indeed is focused on helping people get jobs on the job seeker side and then helping employers find their next hire. So we're a marketplace that helps both the job seeker and the employer find those connections, which is so critical for businesses. It's usually some version of we have an open role and we need to make that happen as quickly as possible. And that's where Indeed comes in. One of the things that I find really interesting about this growth in AI is I think over the last 20, 25, 30 years, you can point to step function changes that have happened within businesses. You think about the .com rise and how that changed the way businesses thought about the internet and their presence on the internet. I think about the rise of social media and the impact that that had on businesses and their ability to connect with consumers much more quickly. Historically, it was pull out an ad in Times Square or in your local newspaper. And it changed how you don't just advertise, it changed how you connect with your consumer. It gave businesses a voice in a way that was unique. I think about the App Store rise. All of these have had huge impact to a business and how they operate. And for the most part, it was very difficult for businesses to ignore that change. And what you did before no longer worked. So you had to really change the way you operated. And I think AI is a big part of that too. AI is changing the way businesses operate, and what you did before no longer works. Whether that's, job seekers are leveraging AI in a way that makes it quite difficult to understand, who is actually qualified for a role. It makes it difficult to understand who's real. The number of jobs or job seekers that you'll get applying for a role has started to explode. And so now you're going through even more resumes than you ever went through before. So figuring out how to use AI on your side as an employer. When do you use AI? How do you use AI? It's a lot of wading through all of this change really quickly and trying to figure out, okay, what do I do and when? And I'm finding that a lot of the feedback I've been hearing from employers is not, here's our perspective. It's frankly, we don't know what to do, which I think is really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we've seen in our research as well. In our HR annual systems report, we found that the majority of the reason people don't use AI is not because of concerns about security and privacy. Of course, that's very high up there, but it's actually a lack of knowledge on AI. Just not quite sure what's going on with it. I think that's definitely been alleviated somewhat in the last couple of years. So I'll be interested to see how this year's data comes out. But, the other thing I think that it's starting to sort of turn into is, okay, they're getting the idea of what it could do, but then it's, I think I've quoted a few movies already now between Spider-Man now and it's about to be Jurassic Park, but it's not what it could do, but it's what it should do, right? And it's the idea of, how is this actually helping? What is the return on investment and how to measure that? I think it's one of the reasons why we've actually seen, of all the areas of HR, recruiting was probably, I think, and let me know if you agree, one of the first areas to really see larger adoption within AI. We've seen already that in our report, 49% of organizations are in some stage of either already having AI in use or are evaluating its use. So that's very large compared to others.
Absolutely. I think that that's 100% true and what we're seeing too. I think what I'm hearing from employers is, how do we use AI? Where in the hiring pipeline should I leverage AI? And then what's going to be, to your point on return on investment, how do I actually communicate things like time saved, fully loaded cost per hire? These are metrics that a lot of the people we're talking to, they're held accountable to. And so being able to report back to their boss or to the board on, this is the investment we decided to make, and here's how much money it's saving the company. There's a gap there that's really difficult to understand for a lot of companies.
Absolutely. That was actually one of the projects we worked on quite a bit, right? In the old RPO days, is trying to figure out the total cost of recruiting, right? Because it's not just the time of the cost of the tool or the time spent, but everything that goes along with it. Sourcing and interviewing and you figuring out, okay, what is the hourly cost of someone to be pulled away for 2 hours to do an interview and write up, their analysis of the interview and having to make the decisions and everything that goes along with it. So that is really fascinating. And I think, it's interesting because we often think of AI in terms of the effect of, let's just have, AI do some of the interviewing itself, right? And not really thinking about the analysis or helping sort of make the sourcing decisions and moving things through the pipeline. For anyone that's listening that isn't familiar with these terms, I realize sometimes it can slip into some recruitment speak, but the pipeline here refers to the idea, and it's almost, it's very easy to understand visually. So I'm going to, if you're not watching this, we also have a video portion because I'll be talking with my hands too much. But you have a large number of people who, you sort of bring in, you say, this is the number of people we would like to at least take a look at for this job to meet the sort of minimum basic requirements. And then you start doing some filtering of saying, these are people now that we think are worthy of an interview. And then you reach out and see, are they available, right? And the pipeline sort of shrinks, think of it as like that funnel or that pipeline. So trying to get through those early stages of, just finding out, are they even available? Do they meet the requirements, not just on paper, but when you talk to them, is this something that would work for them in terms of anything from job requirements to location to structure, anything like that. And then finally, you have your interview stages, and then that filters in the funnel or the pipeline even more. Thinking about the ways AI can be implemented in there, right? Whether it's sourcing and finding people in different locations or helping making those determinations of best fit without eliminating anyone, right? Just more of a sorting procedure. I think that's a lot of the areas where I look at it and go, man, that would have been really helpful to have had 30 years ago. I'm not going to mention how long ago it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I have heard, and I'm curious if you've heard something similar, is the gap between, I know I need to leverage AI. I know I need to, right? A lot of the companies we're talking to, they don't have as many recruiters as they used to have. So they need something to help them with that efficiency gain. But actually getting their team to adopt AI is actually quite difficult. And more often than not, what I hear is some version of, it doesn't think about candidates the way I think about candidates. And, my job as a recruiter, what I'm really good at as a recruiter is finding qualified candidates. And you essentially just added a bad version of a junior recruiter to my group. And now they're going to evaluate candidates poorly. And I think that's where a lot of AI tools miss the opportunity to your point about pipeline. I think a lot of AI tools out there assume we can just replace their recruiter. We don't need that. They can use our tool and then they can focus on that first interview. But what we're finding is that more often than not, the right answer is actually supporting each stage of the funnel. That's where you find the best adoption, the best efficiency gains. So instead of replacement, it's a supporting function.
That's exactly it. And, broadly, when we talk about AI, the promise has been that it will help get rid of some of the more repetitive tasks, the tasks you don't want to do anyway. And it's not that all sourcing falls into the role, but there's a lot of parts of sourcing that was just putting in variations of Boolean searches and looking in different areas and things of that nature that was a little repetitive. And certainly anyone would be welcome to have that in. But there is, of course, something that I don't think AI could ever do, which is, when I'd hear recruiters sort of convince someone of how wonderful a job is, right? Yeah. To get them, and they say, no, I've never really wanted to work in software. And they're like, oh, this company is so great, and the founder's got vision, and there's a lot of opportunities, and find out what it is important to them and make that human connection. And I don't think that there's any of the tools that are saying that they can replicate that, but instead doing the things of, we'll filter out all of the resumes that may have shown up in a search, but are actually, when looked at it broadly, kind of taking that really fast, datafied AI approach, actually these terms don't go together, right? The sort of classic that's overused is, an engineer driving a train versus an engineer working in software, things of that nature, right? But by seeing the context, they can quickly filter out that sort of stuff. So that sort of idea, if you're not watching the video, by the way, you are missing out on some wonderful cattail right
I'm
now.
so sorry.
This is what I love the best. If my dogs were here, they'd be jealous that they weren't getting to be on screen. But it's wonderful. I love it. That's what makes it fun. But yeah, there's all of that stuff. And then there's something else that's happening that I think that AI is kind of becoming necessary for, which is, in a strange way, working against AI on the other side. And what I mean by that is, there's people using their own agents or bots or anything else to sort of spam these jobs, either for all sorts of different reasons. And that makes it very complicated. So having a system that can quickly detect fraudulent patterns, that can use that sort of recognition of saying this is something that is commonly seen in fake ones, that can quickly search companies and realize that these are not real companies that are out there and say, this has already been struck from the record. You don't have to waste your time with it. Then you start, I think, seeing the recruiter's ears perk up a little bit and go, well, actually, that would be very helpful. That is not replacing me. I would love it if something could do that, rather than me having to search and be like, did this person really work at this job and do all of that sort of tasks? And that sounds like something that, when you and I talked before, it is right in, that's the sort of problem that Indeed's trying to solve for, right?
Yeah. When we started building out, we have a new tool called Smart Screening that we launched in January of this year. And when we started down this process of how do we help employers leverage AI in this time of hiring, there were a couple of things that we heard relatively consistently from both job seekers and employers. On the job seeker side, what we heard was trying to find a job is one of the most painful, demoralizing experiences you can have as a person. It's awful. And so, of course, I'm going to use every tool at my disposal in order to look for a job. If I have an AI tool that promises me it'll apply to 100 jobs in a minute, I'm probably going to use it. Right? Like, it's a numbers game. You hear that all the time with hiring. It's a numbers game. You just have to apply to as many as possible. But on the employer side, it's creating this problem. The more job seekers use those type of tools, the more employers will use these filtering AI tools, and then they'll miss candidates. And no side wins. No side is happy with what's happening. They're all just still pretty frustrated. And so with Smart Screening, we had a couple of things that we were focused on early on. One was, how can we eliminate that sort of pre-screening step in a way that doesn't over-index on sort of keyword stuffing, which is what's really common today, right? It's very Boolean, if this, do this, but instead is more nuanced and allows for more open-ended questions. So we have an AI recruiter that you can ask questions and answer questions, and that's sort of the first phase as a job seeker. So you can sort of, here's the things that I know how to do. If a resume is focused on, here are the skills I have, AI recruiter is focused on how do you use those skills. That's sort of the first phase. And then that second phase that we're focused on the job seeker side is giving job seekers the opportunity to really flesh out and complete their profile on Indeed and validate that they have experience in certain areas, whether that's adding a specific certification to their profile or a specific license to their profile, validating their work history on their profile. All of this additional, do you actually have this that you can add to your profile, is so critical in this world of AI. A validation of information, validation of experience is game changer, I think, in the world of AI. And when you have AI without that, you end up in this space of like sort of nonsense and keyword stuffing. And even as an employer, I might be using AI, but like, is it actually helping me find candidates, or is it just sort of filtering based off of keywords, which is not helpful for the job seeker or the employer. But those were the two areas of focus that we had, was this validating of information and then giving job seekers the ability to sort of explain their history and add more to the resume. And the result, I think, is much more valuable. Well, more than I think. We have employers using it. There's a lot of really important data points that we have on our side that's been really helpful. But just the quantitative and qualitative feedback that we've gotten from employers is that the combination of their resume, the job seeker being able to share all of their profile information that they happen to store on their profile. And then any additional information that we get through that AI recruiter really paints a picture of who that job seeker is. And when we survey job seekers, their answer is, I feel like I can actually put my best foot forward in a way that, how can you build an AI tool that job seekers actually enjoy? And that's been what we've focused on is, how do you build out AI tools for employers that job seekers find valuable so that they'll use them and they'll actually leverage them? And that's been our focus. So I feel like we're threading that needle early on quite well, but yeah, that's what we're focused on.
Now that is really fascinating. And you bring up something that I think makes Indeed kind of special in this market is that you have the job seekers perspective in as well. When we would work, with companies that are on the recruiting side, they're working with the employers, right? And that is their perspective. They're trying to help them very much with, applicant tracking and dealing with large volumes and playing the numbers game from the recruiter side. But thinking about it from the job seeker side is just as important too. In my old days, we worked a lot with Monster, of course, and that's very focused on the job seeker side. And thinking about it from their side helps, I think, recruiters too. Each side understanding where each other's coming from is something that I think is always important. I think in the world of recruiting, one of the sort of, secrets or things that I always try and tell people when they're looking for a job is to remind them that more than anything, a company wants to fill the position. They want to hire you. I know it seems strange sometimes. It seems like the system is working against you. Why are they making it so difficult? But believe me, they would love to fill that position. That's what they would like. They'd like to do it quickly and not have it open all the time. But it doesn't seem like that sometimes because, both sides sometimes are coming at it in a sort of antagonistic way rather than working together to figure out, how do we meet each other's needs, right? The job seekers want the job and the job holders, right? It's so hard not to just say Rex, but the people with the jobs are looking to hire someone. Being able to take that perspective of how does this help both the employer, potential employer, and the job seeker, I think kind of gives you a unique perspective and helps you probably thread that needle, right? If you can see both sides of it.
Absolutely. If you think about, the ideal scenario for both the job seeker and the employer is to have that human to human connection so that both people are evaluating whether or not this is a good fit. And I was reading an article the other day about how AI used poorly, it's bots all the way down. It's bots applying for jobs, it's jobs validating bots. And that's an anti-pattern that is not helpful for either party, right? Because it continues to erode that human to human connection. Because at some point in that hiring funnel, you are going to have a human interact with another human. And so our goal has been to focus on how do we get that human to connection to happen as quickly as possible so that both sides feel that validation of, okay, we want to move forward. This makes the most sense for both of us. And we move away from that, bots all the way down.
Yeah, that is definitely, I think anyone that's followed this has probably seen one of those stories where it's a bot applying for a job and a bot doing the interviewing. Yes. And it just, shaking your head. What advice then would you give to sort of both sides? Anyone that's listening to this is probably on one or the other, right? They're either working somewhere and curious about how to best use tools to find the right candidates, or they themselves may be looking for a job, or certainly have at one point in their life looked for a job. If not, thank you for joining. You were the very first person to ever listen to this podcast that has never had to look for a job. Amazing.
I want to know what you do.
Yeah, please comment and let us know how that works. But yeah, what advice would you give to both sides? Let's start with, if you're someone that's out there trying to find someone in this crazy job market, right? What are some things that you think would be helpful for them to know?
Yeah, I think if you're on the employer side and you're trying to find candidates and you're also, chances are your leadership team has said, figure out how to use AI. That's the narrative that we hear across the board. The first thing that I would start with, what we've seen the most success in, is outline exactly what your hiring process is today and where you're having the biggest bottlenecks. Where's your team spending most time? Where are they doing a bunch of operational tactics that's just really time consuming? There's a lot of hidden in hiring, from I've opened the job rack all the way to the person has gone through the background check and they've walked in the door and they have all of the right equipment, right? That's a huge time That's a huge amount of time that every individual step takes its own pieces of time. I said time a lot right there. But I would start there. I would start with outline your entire hiring process and how long each step takes. And then the other thing that I was talking to an employer the other day and we were brainstorming, how do you make this better? And one of the things that we talked about was talk to your most recent hires about the pain points they had in your hiring process. What parts felt really inhuman? What parts felt like it took a really long time to have somebody get back to you about this specific step? And then you've got your roadmap of opportunity. And from there, you can figure out, okay, where's the best place to use AI? Is it top of funnel, getting people to an interview? You're interviewing a bunch of unqualified candidates. How do we make that process better? How do we improve the percentage of people that you're interviewing that are actually qualified for the role? Is it actually just tactically scheduling in the first place? How do you remove that tactical scheduling piece that takes so long? Or are you finding it's all the way down the funnel on the offer to hire? Is that where your biggest time suck is? But really starting with outlining, and then you can figure out where you can add AI to those different stages to find that optimization. The benefit when you start there is you have really clear metrics that you want to improve for each stage. So you don't start sort of generically, we want it to be better, we're hoping it'll be better. But you start with like, okay, this is what we're looking at today. This is how long it takes us to get a hire. Here's what we want it to be. And then you can hold the tools that you are trying or piloting, you can hold them accountable to actually showing you that measurable improvement. A lot of tools will give you good vibes, but you really want to hold them accountable to that ROI. That's going to be critical, I think, in this stage of AI adoption. Good vibes is not enough. You need to actually hold tools accountable to what the value that they're providing you. And the best way to do that is to know what your metrics are when you start at the very beginning.
I love it.
So that's what I would say.
I like it. And then any advice then for job seekers that are out there? I like the idea of reaching out and saying, what was your experience like? But what would you say for those that are navigating this world now that maybe have never had to do this in the AI world?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, I think the best thing you can do as a job seeker is validate as much information as possible, right? So, AI tools are getting better at reading resumes, at reading content, but I don't think any job seeker would say my resume is an accurate reflection of who I am and not just my ability to do the job, but my potential, right? It's just sort of this static page that is what it is. And the more you can, as a job seeker, validate, I actually have this experience. This is actually what I've gone through. These are the certifications I have. This is the license that I got, my work history. That validation, I think, will be critical in this next phase of AI for employers, because that's what they're going to be looking for. It's not just, did you write it down, but can you validate that information? And the sooner you can validate that up funnel, I think the easier it will be for job seekers to get through that hiring process, especially in this world of fraudulent applies that is sort of expanding across the board. It's easier than ever to just submit fake applies. So validating who you are as a job seeker will help you stand out. Little plug for your profile on Indeed.
I like it.
I would say that is probably the most important thing you can do as a job seeker. And then the second thing is a lot of job seekers are leveraging AI in terms of, help me rewrite my resume. Am I actually talking about the right things? I think what AI doesn't necessarily get right is that human element. AI has a very specific voice. I'm sure if we've read anything written by Gemini or ChatGPT, you know it immediately. And so whatever tools you're using to help you, rewrite your sentences, like, hey, I want to make sure that I'm saying this really well. You still want it to have a very distinct voice to who you are, because when you just copy and paste, everyone knows. You use those M dashes like everyone else, and it's a key giveaway. You really want it to be from your voice, and you want to focus on the right things. And that's one of the best things that I think you can do as a job seeker, is ensure that your voice is still being communicated throughout your resume of who you are.
No, I really like that. It's very interesting because we're kind of going through this stages of, I don't know, almost like, I really don't know the good metaphor for it yet, but as AI has kind of gone through this growth stage with us and how we as humans have sort of learned to adapt, it went from being like, okay, we're going to use it for everything to, there's sort of some pushback, and now it's like, okay, here's some useful areas. And what we're finding more and more is really helping us to find what we do best as humans, right? And then focusing on that. Rather than figuring out, how can we best use AI? It's like, how can we best use ourselves? Where do we best drop out of this game and, express ourselves as who we are, but then still, find value in some of the, as we said, sort of repetitive tasks, maybe not the Gen AI stuff as much as it is the, as you said, the validation and the looking for fraud and the searching and the big data side. So that's really fascinating. I really like it. This is going to be my, third movie quote of the day. I don't know why there's so many, but in war games, they said the only way to win is not to play. And that's sort of, this continued arms race between, the bots, the recruiters and the employee side. And so it's saying, no, we're just going to drop it. We're not going to involve ourselves with that. Instead, we're just going to craft a nice human experience, but still let the machines, filter out the bad actors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that I do want to just call out is, as a job seeker, you're going to do whatever it takes to get a job, right? Like that's your goal at the end of the day. And it's why we started with smart screening on the employer side, making that employer experience better and helping them identify those candidates who have validated their experience in their profile, who've added that information. Because starting with the job seeker and saying, hey, don't do that, it's a learned behavior. Of course they're going to. That they're going to do whatever they need to do to get a job. So when we start with the employer side and we actually make that experience better, then you can turn to the job seeker and say, see, this is what you can do in order to really set yourself apart as a candidate, as a potential hire. And that felt like the right motion. You start with making that employer experience better, and then the job seeker behavior will follow. So I think there's something to that, instead of going to job seekers and saying, stuff it.
Yeah, there's been a couple of really great quotes. I'm wondering whether that will be pulled out of good vibes isn't enough will be the quote that we hear the most for that. But that is really wonderful. And thank you for that. I think this is very timely too, right? Before, maybe not the best reasons, but the job market is going to be very, let's say, fast paced. It's going to be, there's going to be a lot going on, as we've already seen. Employment numbers are volatile, probably at best, and depressing at worst, but having the right tools and really finding how to get those two groups that really do have the exact same goals in mind, I think, is the good work that's being done out there. Because really, truly, having been on both sides of it, I do know that the goal is the same, right? For people to fill positions is what both sides want, and anything that can help facilitate that process, I think, as well.
Cliff, at the very beginning, you shared what percentage of HR teams are leveraging AI. Can you remind me of that stat again?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you that overall, it's 49%. And I want to point out that for some people, it'd say, oh, that might seem low, but this is specifically using embedded AI in recruiting. That number is actually the highest that we see across all the different HR applications. We see a lot of use of outside tools, bringing your own AI to work, right? When it comes to the different tools that are out there, recruiting actually has the highest number of embedded AI functions because of hopefully of what you said, of people saying, this is an area where I can see this could really be useful. But now here's the thing, that's the highest usage and still really not that high.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Even though it's a pretty high number, a couple of different research reports have come out in the last few months that are showing that time to hire is also increasing. So more teams are using AI, and it's still taking longer to get a hire. And I think that tells us everything we need to know about whether or not AI is finding those efficiency gains yet at scale. That is the goal. That goes back to, how do you actually implement AI well? I think that's the anti-pattern that you want to avoid is I'm leveraging AI, but my time to hire is going up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, this is fascinating, and it's nice for me to revisit those days. And thank you so much, Aly, for joining us today. So you mentioned your role at Indeed. Where can people find you online, on social media, LinkedIn? Where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Aly Baxter is my name. LinkedIn.com/Aly Baxter. I am there occasionally. And I've been at Indeed for almost 5 years. If people want to comment with questions or they have follow-up thoughts, feel free to add them. I'd love to hear how your team is either finding success or not leveraging all of these new tools in this new space.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear from you too. Aly had mentioned that one of her recommendations was to ask job seekers what their experience was like. So we'd like to hear yours. Where are you finding, where are you finding these walls and these obstacles in your job search? What have you found to be successful? Share your experience, and then we can start opening that dialogue to employers to let them know that this is what job seekers are looking for, this is what's working, and this is what isn't. I'll tell you what has worked wonderfully is you being here today, Aly. Thank you so much for joining us on HR Huddle. I'd also like to thank everyone over at Brand Method Media Group, the wonderful Kelly, who leads up over there. Any of the great editing and whichever pull quote will be due to their wonderful work. Our marketing team, and including Caitlin Diamond, Summer Oyano, and everyone else from Sapient Insights Group that makes it happen. The Work Defined family of podcasts, and mostly you, the listener, for being here, for joining us, for helping making this a successful podcast. We've really enjoyed it. And if you've enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe, you can favorite it, whichever app, leave us a review if you have a minute. As Aly said, feel free to drop a comment and join the conversation. And we'll be back in another 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Bye, everyone.